Hello to all our learners. Welcome to the lecture on contrasting critical perspectives in international relations. I am Dr. Amna. I teach political science at Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College for Women, University of Delhi. Dear learners, the lecture will try to demonstrate the major assumptions, features about key perspectives and theories in international relations, namely realism, idealism, liberalism, Marxism. It will also compare and contrast them in order to provide a comprehensive outlook on various perspectives prevailing in the domain of theories of international relations. We now, as we begin our learning, first let's try to understand what do we understand by an approach in international relations. By approach, we mean it is a perspective. Perspective offering us a way, a mechanism of understanding world politics. Realism dominated the academic study of international relations since the end of the Second World War. Before realism, the idealist school was prevalent in the understanding of international relations. The first chair for study of international relations was established at the University of Aberystwyth in 1919. We all know that the ideas of idealism stood and believed in the inherent idea of peace, goodness of human nature that would be there to safeguard world affairs. However, the crude realities of the First World War, the starting of the Second World War, failure of Treaty of Versailles, failure of international organizations like League of Nations question the idealist paradigm in international relations. Political realism, the idea in the sense of 6 principles presented to us by Hans Morgenthau. Now, to understand this debate between two perspectives first, that is idealism versus realism, we will first explain the principles of 6 principles of political realism, and we read it out from Morgenthau's work, Politics Amongst Nations. First principle, political realism believes that politics, like society in general, is governed by objective laws that have their roots in human nature. Now, this is critical of idealism. For realism, the theory consists in asserting facts and giving them meaning through reason. Second, the main signpost that helps political realism to find its way through the landscape of international politics is the concept of interest defined in terms of power. Now, concept of interest defined as power imposes, as Morgenthau's work says, and we quote, intellectual discipline upon the observer, infuses rational actor into the subject matter of politics, and thus makes the theoretical understanding of international politics possible. Realism assumes in its third principle that its key concept of interest, defined as power, is an objective category which is universally valid, but it does not endow that concept with a meaning that is fixed once and for all. Once again, reading out from 6 principles of political realism, the idea of interest is indeed of the essence of politics and is unaffected by circumstances of time and place. Political realism is aware of the moral significance of political action. It is also aware of the ineluctable tension between moral command, and requirements of successful political action. The fifth principle, political realism refuses to identify moral aspirations of a particular nation with the moral laws that govern the universe, as it distinguishes between truth and opinion, so it distinguishes between truth and idolatry. To know that nations are subjected to moral laws, it says, is one thing, while to pretend with certainty what is good and evil in the relations amongst nations is quite another. The sixth principle holds, and we quote, the difference then between political realism and other schools of thought is real and it is profound. Intellectually, the political realist maintains autonomy of the political sphere. So, here we see as we read out the six principles of political realism, this was from Hans J. Morgenthau's work, Politics Amongst Nations, the Struggle for Peace and Power. Now, from this we try to understand that how realism has its own tradition, from classical realism, political realism, to the new variant of neorealism, or to the breakage of offensive versus defensive realism. Let's understand this one. Offensive realism is a structured theory belonging to neorealist schools of thought put forward by John Mearsheimer in response to defensive realism. Offensive realism holds that the anarchic nature of the international system is responsible for the promotion of aggressive state behavior in international politics. This is fundamentally different from what was called as defensive realism by depicting great powers as power maximizers, revisionists privileging buck passing and self-promotion over balancing strategies in their constant aim to dominate the international system. Let's now compare idealism and realism. Now, what do we understand by idealism? That idealism is when you envision or see things in an ideal or perfect manner. Realism, as we just saw, on the other hand, tends towards a more pragmatic and actual view of a situation. Idealism brought the focus towards what ought to be. Realism puts the focus towards what is. Realism, also known as political realism, is a view of international politics that stresses its competitive, conflictual side, in contrast to the idealist perspective, which tends to emphasize the good side, the peace, the cooperation perspective. Realism is concerned with the world as it actually is, rather than how it ought to be. In other words, realism, it is empirical rather than a normative paradigm. Now, as we have been seeing, that realism encompasses a vast variety of approaches. It claims to have a long theoretical tradition also, from Thucydides to Machiavelli's brilliant work Prince, to Thomas Hobbes' magnus opus Leviathan, to Morgenthau's six principles of political realism. All of it presents to us broad contours of realism, where the idea of need to secure your interests, the idea of struggle for power is very central in order to understand the dynamics of the political activity. Another variant of realism, neorealism, often called as structural realism. Now, this is a theory of international relations that also, like realism, agrees that state is the most important factor in international relations. This has been outlined by Kenneth Waltz. One of the very important works of Kenneth Waltz, which has a huge bearing for neorealist perspective, is the 1979 book by Waltz, Theory of International Politics. Neorealism represented an effort to inject greater precision or conceptual rigor into realist theory. Let's read out from some of the ideas presented by Kenneth Waltz, and we quote, "For Waltz, the uniform behavior of states over centuries can be explained by the constraints on their behavior that are imposed by the structure of the international system. Idea of structure as it is reflected in alliances and other cooperative arrangements among states of varying states, strengths, capabilities. Anarchy, or what we can say the absence of central authority, as per the neorealist, is the ordering principle of international system. The units of the international system are states. Since all states want to survive, an anarchy presupposes a self-help system in which each state has to take care of itself, and there is no division of labor or functional differentiation amongst them. So, the picture that emerges here is, while functionally similar, they are nonetheless distinguished by their relative capabilities, that is, power each of them represents to perform the same function. Distribution of capabilities among states can vary. Anarchy, the ordering principle of international relations, remains unchanged. This has a lasting effect on the behavior of states that become socialized into the logic of self-help. At this hour, it is very essential to pinpoint towards the 3S of realism, which helps us to compare and contrast the various variants of realism also. For political realism to neorealism, what are the then similarities here? First is, both are rational theories. Second, both are status quoist theories, and both realism, political realism as well as structural realism, they abide by the logic of 3S, that is statism leading to self-help, leading to survival. Morgenthau's classical realism, as we saw, was succeeded by the founding father of neorealism's work, that was by Kenneth Waltz. The classical realist differentiated between status quo power and revisionist power. However, neorealism regards states as unitary power, and it has been argued in the work of Schweller also. The classical realists locate the roots of international conflict and war in an imperfect human nature. However, neorealists maintain that its deep causes are found in the anarchic international system. Another point of differentiation presented to us by Hobson in his work, that state is ontologically superior to the system in classical realism. Now, this is in contrast to neorealism, allowing more space for agency in the former approach. Now, a very important work that we saw, and it is from EIR, we must also refer to that work in order to understand and delve deeper into the debates that are going in the realm. Neorealists attempt to construct a more rigorous and scientific approach to the study of international politics, heavily influenced by the behavioralist revolution of the 1960s. However, in contrast, the classical realism confined the analysis to subjective valuations of international relations. So therefore, neorealist attempts to make the realist theory more scientific. The ideas that was based on principles, they have been explained in a rigorous format by Kenneth Walt's perspective of neorealism. When we compare and contrast realism with neorealism, once again points of similarities and points of dissimilarities has to be seen. Similarity between realism and neorealism, both are status quoists, rational theories believing in the ideas of statism, self-help, survival, power maximization, and differences in terms, that is, realism gives importance to human nature. However, neorealism locates the power struggle within the anarchic structure of world politics. The next perspective, the approach that is of liberalism, is the school of thought within international relations theory. Quite often it is seen as an extension of the idealist views of Immanuel Kant that democracies don't go to war, thereby the notion of perpetual peace. Woodrow Wilson's 14 peace point program after the First World War, that is respect for territorial integrity, sovereignty, respecting commercial laws, pledge towards disarmament, amongst others. So the liberal school is about rejection of power politics. It focuses on mutual benefits and international cooperation. It looks at the role of international organization and other non-state actors that shape the state preferences and policy choices. So herein lies the difference. Now let's compare and contrast realist with liberal school. The realists focus on the power side, the conflictual side, the struggle perspective, the pessimistic perspective of international politics. The liberals, as opposed to that, focus on mutual benefits, avenues of international cooperation. For the realists, the state is the only actor, the rational actor. For liberals, state is no doubt the only actor. However, one can also has to factor in role of other international organizations, non-governmental actors that shape state preferences and policies. International institutions for them provide a forum to resolve disputes in a non-violent way. International trade by the liberal school is seen as a way of expansion of human freedom, spread of democracy, that is, it believes in the ethos of democracies in order to prevent war and prevent conflict. So therefore, when we compare and contrast liberalism and realism, political realism views states as the primary actor. Pluralism agrees that state is an important actor, but however it says that other non-state actors are equally important in the international system. Liberals argue that absolute power is important than relative power. So here comes an important distinction between relative gain versus absolute gain. For the realist, relative gains are important because the international polity, international game, international realities are like a zero-sum games. It states that wealth cannot be expanded, and the only way a state can become better is to inflict harm or to take things away from the other, because it is like my gain is equal to your loss is equal to my gain. The liberal says that look at the total effect of the decision on the state, the organization, regardless of the gains made by the other, and this is the perspective of absolute gains. Then another important distinction that comes here is between the neo-realist and the neo-liberal, which is often called as the neo-neo debate. Let's compare and contrast. For the neo-liberals, the idea of cooperation is important. For neo-realist, the focus is on anarchy. In the domestic structure, hierarchy exists because there is a government to regulate, but in the international realms there is anarchy because there is no world government. For the neoliberals, it is absolute power which is important, or absolute gains. for the neo-realists, it is the relative gains that has to be the focus. The liberals have a broad-based agenda which looks into economics, human resources, knowledge regimes, and other inputs into the power bargaining. But however, for the neo-realists, it is the security, military perspective which is much more possible. For the neo-realists, the chances of cooperations are bleak because of anarchy. For the neo-liberals, anarchy exists, yet international institutions through norms, regimes, institutions can have a mitigating impact on the existence of anarchy. Robert Keohane and Joseph Nye also give the idea of complex interdependence to forward the liberal perspective and translate it towards neoliberalism in order to work answer to the changing realities. And the work by Keohane and Nye is Power and Interdependence. It talks about existence of multiple channels of communications, decline in use of military power by the states, and absence of hierarchy of issues, that is high power versus low power, which has led to different understanding, different regulation of world politics. The next perspective is the Marxist perspective, the neo-Marxist perspective, which reject the idealist realist views of conflict and cooperation. The Marxist perspective rather focuses on the economic, the material aspects of the economy, and it says that it's the economy that trumps all other things. And it says that yes, the state is the important actor in international relations, but in order to understand global politics in the new Marxist perspective and in the Marxist perspective of world system theory, of dependency theory, it is said that look at the economic divisions in the world aspect, wherein the rich countries grow at the cost of the diversion of resources from the poor countries. Development of the core, if we quote from the world system theory, is a byproduct of the underdevelopment of the periphery, or for that matter developed the idea of rich north as the dependency theory perspective puts forward, is because of unequal trade bargains and idea of trade-offs that are involved in the trade with the poorer and the developing world. So therefore, the Marxist perspective says the power struggle is of capitalist exploitation and domination, wherein the Marxist perspective adds class as the focus of study. And all the theories liberalism, realism, neo-realism, they were more in the nature of rational theories. So when we compare and contrast them with the Marxist perspective, the reflectivist perspective comes forward, and in this we have had theories like feminism, critical theory, environmentalism, that have often taken the focus away from status quo towards looking into the human agencies. So dear learners, today in this lecture, when we are trying to compare and contrast different perspectives of international relations, we have to first understand that each approach is a way of putting things forward. Each approach gives us an understanding how to analyze world issues and world politics. For the realists, it is about power struggle. For the liberals, it is about giving the focus more towards cooperation and avenues of peace. For the Marxists, however, it is a paradigm which rejects conflict and cooperation, but rather brings the focus towards how capitalism becomes an instrument of domination and division of world into rich versus poor, and this leads to power inequalities in the larger world structure. For reflectivist perspective like feminism, it looks at the question, where are women, and brings into light gendered exclusion in the realm of power, in the realm of decision making, amongst others. A reflectivist perspective like constructivism brings into focus how ideas are essential, how norms are essential while building a grand narrative. For a reflectivist perspective like postmodernism, this critiques any kind of meta-narrative, and it is often called as incredulity towards meta-narrative, looking into power, knowledge, discourse. For another perspective like environmentalism, it once again brings the focus towards the human agency as to how the idea of operation of international relations has given ecology, environmental sustainability a backseat. So this was about comparing and contrasting main perspectives in international relations. Dear learners, we hope you all gained significant insights into analyzing perspectives of international relations, and also at the same time compare and contrast them for a holistic understanding of various perspectives in international relations theory. Thank you.